Yes, a hypocrite comes from the Greek word for a mask. In acting, you put on a mask. So what they see on the outside is not what's on the inside, and that is what is so infuriating to Jesus, is their hypocrisy. They pretend to be that which they are not. And in pretending to be that which they are not, they do not humble themselves. In pretending to be that which they are not, they exalt themselves, and they want to project the image, false though it may be, that they are holy and pious and devout and religious and all that. And this just rings clear in this whole chapter. Now, I suggested to you, using James Montgomery Boyce's 7 points. There are 7 woes here, and 7 is the number of completeness. And woe means trouble. Woe means bad. Woe means something disastrous. And there's 7 of them, so it's complete. We have looked at 5. I'm not going back over the first 5, but let's start on 6, which is verse 27. And if you would turn there to verse 27. Boyce calls this, he sums up this part of it, 27 through 28, as wickedness within. Listen. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! For you are like whitewashed tombs, which outwardly appear beautiful, but within they are full of dead people's bones and all uncleanness. So you also outwardly appear righteous to others, but within you are full of hypocrisy and lawlessness. How would you feel if you were on the other end of that? I'm told that in Jerusalem, I don't know whether it's everywhere, but in Jerusalem, of course, they have pilgrims coming all the time because they have feasts, they have festivals. Right now, they're in the midst of the Passover feast. And pilgrims would come from all over the Palestine area. And they would go out prior to that and put whitewash on all the tombs. Literally, they did. The reason they did that, so they would stand out. They would be glistening. They would be gleaming in the sunlight. And that would be a sign to the pilgrims, don't touch this. It's a tomb, see? If you touch a tomb, you make yourself unclean. So it was like a warning. It was like a red light, a stop light or something. Stop! Don't touch this tomb. But in the process, they made the tombs look beautiful. Gleaming white. But of course, inside they're full of decaying bodies. And he says, you're like that. You appear on the outside beautiful, pious, religious, God-fearing, observing the law, and inside you are corrupt. You're rotting spiritually. So, wickedness within, hypocrisy. The last of the 7 woes begins at verse 29. And Boyce simply says this is the murder of God's prophets. It's a link longer one, so listen to it. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! For you build the tombs of the prophets and decorate the monuments of the righteous, saying, if we had lived in the days of our fathers, we would not have taken part with them in shedding the blood of the prophets. Thus you witness against yourselves that you are sons of those who murdered the prophets. Fill up then the measure of your fathers. You serpents, you brood of vipers, how are you to escape being sentenced to hell? Therefore I send you prophets and wise men and scribes, some of whom you will kill and crucify, and some you will flog in your synagogues and persecute from town to town, so that on you may come all the blood of innocent Abel, all the blood of the righteous, shed on the earth, from the blood of innocent Abel to the blood of Zechariah the son of Berechiah, whom you murdered between the sanctuary and the altar. Truly I say to you, these things will come upon this generation. Now, here's another example of their hypocrisy. they, I suppose, repaired the tombs of the prophets. They decorated them. They made them look pretty. In this sense, to say, we honor these prophets whom you sent, God. We respect them. And then they say, they make this audacious claim. If we had been living then, we would never have done that. We would not have murdered the prophets. Jesus says, I know better. That's a flat-out lie. In verse 31, he says, thus you witness against yourselves that you are sons of those who murdered the prophets. It's a line of murderous people down there. And they're the last. They are the last. Now look at 32. Very interesting. Fill up then the measure of your fathers. Have you noticed in the Bible, reading Old Testament and New Testament, many times this fill up symbol, analogy that you find. The cup is full. Drink the cup full. Paul writes in Romans 11 that there is a full measure of Gentiles. And when we reach that full measure of the Gentiles, God is going to turn to the Jews. In Revelation, the measure, the fullness of the martyrs is not yet. There are more martyrs to come. So this idea is like a vessel, a cup, some, I think glass, but they probably didn't have glasses, but some type of a drinking vessel that is filled to the brim. And there is a point when you fill something that you can't put any more in, it's going to run over. And that's the completion point. That's the full measure. What Jesus is saying is, it has not yet happened. The measure of murder of the prophets is not yet complete, but you will complete it. What an indictment that is. You're going to take it to the brim. You're going to take it to the top. And he's going to tell them how. But verse 33 comes in. You know, probably the worst thing you can call anybody, I think, is a snake. I think most of us hate snakes. Some people don't, but I don't care for snakes. But to call somebody a snake implies they are low and slithery and venomous, especially viper. That's a poisonous snake. So he called them poisonous snakes. So he really denounced them here. And then he says, this is pretty plain, how are you going to escape being sentenced to hell? That's about as strong language as you will find. They are going to hell. Plain and simple. And now verse 34, he's going to tell them how they will fill up the measure of their fathers. Therefore, I send you. I send you. Think about that a minute. I send you. Who sends prophets? What did you say, John? Or Ed?
You said
who sends prophets?
God.
God. And when Jesus says, I send prophets, what's he saying?
God.
I am God. Exactly. He is making a very definite identification of himself with God once again. And it happens so many times. And here's the point. I didn't intend to say this. It'll take up time, but I'm going to say it anyway. It's what C.S. Lewis said. Jesus claimed to be God. You cannot deny that. And if he is not God, he is a liar, or else he's out of his mind. There is no other choice. Lewis has it as Lord, lunatic, or liar. One of the three. Well, the trilemma. Anyway, I send you prophets and wise men and scribes, some of whom you will kill and crucify, and some you will flog in your synagogues and persecute from town to town. So he said, this is going to happen. I know it's going to happen. He's God. He knows what's going to happen. You're going to persecute. You're going to continue persecuting the prophets I send you in a terrible way, and in that you will fill up the measure, fill up the cup to the brim. And it's going to stop. Because you're going to stop. Because this is the last generation. The kingdom's going to be taken away from them. And that happened when? 70 AD. Jerusalem is destroyed, and the religious clergy, leadership, the religion of the Jews, with its priesthood, all of it ended. It has not been resumed since, and it will not be resumed. It's over. It's done. What you have today with Judaism is a family religion. So, then he says, verse 35, you're going to be held accountable for all of the deaths of the prophets. It's almost, when I read this, I thought this is almost representative, very much like Adam was representative of the whole human race, very much like Jesus is representative of the redeemed race. And he says, you people, the last generation of the clergy of the Jews, of the religious leadership of the Jews, you are going to be held accountable for all the evil, all of the murders that have been done. And he starts with Abel, all the way from Abel, who was killed by Cain, his brother, to Zechariah the son of Berechiah. I don't know much about Zechariah the son of Berechiah, but apparently he was the last prophet mentioned in the Bible. He's in 2 Chronicles, and to the Jews, that's their last book of their Bible. So you're going to be held accountable. And then verse 36, he says, truly I say, all these things will come upon this generation. It's all about to happen. And it did. I want to read you some things that Linsky says, the Lutheran scholar. He says, this is the dreadful voice of judgment. And I quote now, judgment is like a measure into which guilt is poured. Like a measuring cup. One wicked Jewish generation after another has already poured in all its black guilt, making the nation's measure almost full. When these late sons of those murderous Jews now pour in their bloody guilt by murdering not only God's own Son, but also the messengers that he will send them after his murder, the vessel will not contain it all, the guilt will overflow, the judgment will descend. The burning intensity now reaches its highest pitch. There is no way to escape the judgment of Gehenna hell. And Linsky goes on to say, up to a certain time, the Lord's hand restrains that punishment with warnings. And those warnings are ever more intense. It's very much like 2 Thessalonians 2 about the restraining of that wicked one. And then it's going to happen, it's going to come. These crimes, Linsky said, are the final answer. This is chilling. These crimes are the final answer of the Jews to the Lord's final offer of grace. I've heard that we should never presume upon the grace of God, because it may not be available to us. Paul said, now is the day of salvation. Grace had been offered to these Jews for 1,500 years, and they had rejected it. This is the final offer. And Jesus is saying, as a judge, it is now withdrawn. You've blown it, and now you don't have any more chance. Grace is taken away from you. And now the pent-up wrath of outraged justice breaks forth like a volcano. Thus, in this way, came on the last generation of the Jews all the righteous blood poured out on the earth from the blood of Abel to Zechariah. The entire chapter has been one of stern denunciation. And here's where Linsky said it. Calm, measured, irresistible, fortified with absolute proof at every step. I think I can picture Jesus. I wonder what these scribes and Pharisees are thinking in their hearts. Are they really thinking that he is just a madman, he's a false prophet, or do they realize he is the Son of God and they've had it? That's when Tim takes a walk.
It's getting fat.
Thank you, Tim.
It works.
It works. Now the final part. He addresses Jerusalem. And I also found something that Linsky said that is very poignant. And I don't rely just on him, but I found this part of it helpful. He said, if you're ever going to sit in judgment on anybody, and I hesitate to do that, it usually backfires on me if I do it, but if you sit in judgment on anybody, don't you do it until you have shed tears over that person's sin. Until you have wept over the sins of a person, don't you dare sit in judgment on them. It's a good point. Jesus is weeping. This is said with the deepest emotion. I feel sure there were tears in his eyes. Oh, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the city that kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to it. How often would I have gathered your children together as a hen gathers her brood under her wings, and you would not. Now, mother animals, if it's a cat or dog, whatever, they gather their little ones, and they protect their little ones, and the chicken gathers her chicks. Jesus said, how often I wanted to just gather you to my bosom as a chick gathers her, as a hen gathers her chickens. You would not. You turned down offers of grace. Verse 38, see, your house is left to you desolate. They would see it in 40 years, for sure. For I tell you, you will not see me again until you say, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Someday you will see me. Someday every eye will see him. And they will know. Any comments or questions as we turn the page?
The irony of this, a lot of these that he's speaking to here in just a few days will witness his crucifixion.
Absolutely.
And be a part of that crowd that says crucify.
And thus they will take the first step in filling up the measure. And Jesus knows it. He knows exactly what's going to happen. He's God. Any other comment? Question? We move to chapter 24. Very controversial chapter, by the way. I'll do the best I can. As ever, as always, you are totally free to disagree with me. I am not offended. We are here to study, and so if you have a different idea, you certainly can present it. It is a difficult chapter. And one thing that makes it difficult is mixing the things that Jesus says in this chapter with what we see in Revelation 20. And I'm not so sure that's a good mixture. Because Revelation 20, talking about the millennium, is highly symbolic, and this isn't. Anyway, and out of this comes, of course, the premillennial, postmillennial, amillennial, preterist arguments. You may have strong views on that. That's fine. Let's just look at 24 and see what it says. I'm not going to bring in Revelation 20 at any point. Jesus left the temple and was going away. When his disciples came to point out to him the buildings of the temple. But he answered them, you see all these things, do you not? Truly I say to you, there will not be left here one stone upon another that will not be thrown down. They're walking out of the temple. By the way, this is the last time that Jesus is ever in the temple. This is the last time he walks out of the temple. No more. This is still Tuesday of that week, that last week. And as he walks out of the temple, his disciples say, look, isn't this glorious? Look at these buildings. It must have been glorious. I don't know why they said it then. I don't know if they realized this is the last time they'll be here. It just occurred to them to point out how beautiful this temple was. You know, the first temple was built by Solomon. It was very beautiful. It was destroyed by the Babylonians in 586. 70 years later, it was rebuilt by Zerubbabel and others. And when it was rebuilt and dedicated, the people stood around and wept because they said, it's not anything like the first one. They saw that it was not as glorious. When Herod came to power, Herod the Great, he started rebuilding it. He may have been doing that to impress the Jews. Idumea. But at any rate, he spent what we see of 42 years building it. And evidently it was spectacular. He must have spared no expense. It was quite a monument. And so there are many different buildings here, courtyards and all that. It would have been something to see. So the disciples pointed it out. Verse 2, but Jesus said, you see all these things, do you not? Truly I say to you, there will not be left one stone upon another that will not be thrown down. And that's quite a prediction to make. And it was fulfilled, quite literally. Now, the disciples must have been wondering, if that was a shocking statement to say this beautiful temple is going to be destroyed and not one stone of it is left standing upon another. And I imagine that as they walked from the temple, where the temple was, they were going to go across the Kidron Brook to the Mount of Olives. And as they were walking across that, I imagine there was silence. Imagine these disciples didn't say anything because they're cogitating. They're thinking, what does he mean? So as soon as verse 3, as soon as he sat on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately, which suggests to me that there were some other people around and they were taught privately. I have something to ask you, Jesus. Tell us, when will these things be? And what will be the sign of your coming and the close of the age? I think they probably considered that when the temple is destroyed, that's going to be the end of the world. And Christ is going to come again. And Jesus answered them, see that no one leads you astray. For many will come in my name, saying, I am the Christ. And they will lead many astray. And you will hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that you're not alarmed, for this must take place, but the end is not yet. For nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and there'll be famines and earthquakes in various places. All these are but the beginning of birth pains. The first twinges of pain that a pregnant woman experiences prior to giving birth, but not yet the birth. Then they will deliver you up to tribulation, and put you to death, and you will be hated by all nations for my name's sake. And then many will fall away and betray one another and hate one another. And many false prophets will arise and lead many astray. And because lawlessness will be increased, the love of many will grow cold. But the one who endures to the end will be saved. And this gospel of the kingdom will be proclaimed throughout the whole world as a testimony to all nations. And the end will come. As I read that, it suggests to me that Jesus is answering the part of the question that says, when is going to be the end of the age and your coming? I think he answered that part first. I may be wrong, but it fits. Why? Twice, in verse 3 and in verse 12, or 13, verse 13. The word end, telos, is used without an article. In other words, and then end will come. An end without the in front of it, which always we have to translate the end. Just saying end will come would suggest final end. Further, in verse 3, the word that is used by the disciples for the close of the age is the complete close of the age. Also, kingdom rising against nation, wars, all of this, the proclamation of the gospel to the very ends of the earth would suggest to me a longer period of time than 40 years. There's one of the elders in the church where we used to attend, and I used to preach some. Was very good at keeping record of all these things, looking into some of these things that other people don't pay much attention to. And David said one time, you know, we've reached the point now, for the first time in the history of the world, where the entire world has been evangelized. Not everybody has been converted, but the gospel has gone to the entire world. I don't know whether he's right, but that's what he said. But Jesus said the final end will not come until the world is totally evangelized. And all of this is going to happen. What do you think, what's the takeaway from this? What is the main message Jesus is trying to convey to his disciples here?
That God will be effective in completing his
He
plan.
will be effective. Any other thought? Didn't hear you, please. You're in the back.
The kingdom is not temple.
Okay, yes.
He's thinking. He's
Yeah.
thinking.
Yeah.
Sorry, I can't, it's hard to hear with fans. Actually, I had my hearing tested the other day and they said it's perfectly good, so. Something else? Well, yes, thank you, Jane. Don't be led astray. Over and over again he says, expect it, don't be deceived. I believe the elect can never be deceived finally and fatally, but we can be deceived temporarily, and that will cause us trouble. Do not be deceived. Do not be led astray. You're going to hear wars, rumors of wars. You're going to be persecuted. Nation's going to rise against nation. So there's going to be wars, there's going to be natural disasters, famines, and earthquakes, and persecution against you. You're going to be hated everywhere. Same thing is said in John 15. You're going to be hated everywhere, all the time. False prophets, false teaching. Expect it. It's going to happen. Don't be deceived. In other words, forewarned is forearmed. I'm telling you ahead of time, so you know what's going to happen. And the gospel will be preached everywhere. I'm going to tell you something. I've quoted Linsky quite a bit. James Montgomery Boyce, I looked at him, I looked at Calvin, but Boyce is quite helpful as well. But there's something that he said as an example that really struck me, and I'm going to tell you as we close our class today. You may have heard of Donald Gray Barnhouse. Donald Gray Barnhouse was the pastor at 10th Presbyterian Church in Philadelphia who preceded James Montgomery Boyce there. He was well known, excellent preacher, excellent preacher. He had gone to Europe with the intention of holding some meetings, preach the gospel, in Scotland and then in Ireland, Northern Ireland. His family had gone with him, but they had decided to stay in the northern coast of France, I think it was Normandy, and kind of vacation there while these meetings were going on. And he finished the one in Scotland, and he had a week between the Scotland meeting and the Belfast, Northern Ireland meeting. So he decided to take a quick trip across the channel to visit his family. He was advised not to do it. And he was advised that if he did it, that he'd come back early. This was September of 1939. You may know what happened in September of 1939. And he went over to France, and he was going to preach on Sunday, and he started back on Thursday, taking the advice of people who said, if you're going to go at all, you better come back quickly. And so he caught a train from Normandy into Paris, and from Paris to the coast. And as he went through France on the train, there were planes flying over. People were looking very distressed. The train was it was stopping everywhere. Of course, that took up a lot of time. He's losing time. But it stopped everywhere so that he would see people boarding wearing their military uniforms. And people were looking very upset. And then he heard the tocsin. You know what the tocsin is? In Europe, in the Middle Ages, they developed a way of communicating by the bells, church bells. They would ring the bell when it's time for worship. They ring the bell, as Alice and I knew living in Vienna, right across the street from a church. Every morning at 7 o'clock it rings. Get up, say your morning prayers. It rings for funerals, it rings for weddings, but when disaster is imminent, when there's a catastrophe on the horizon, it rings constantly. Like if the fire has broken out in the city or something like that, and the tocsin was sounding all the time. Of course, Dr. Barnhouse was naturally getting concerned. He crossed the channel, got to the channel, got to Paris, and then took another train to the channel. He crossed the channel, got to England, the coast of England. He had to take a train to London, and a train then to the coast, the western coast of England, before going to Ireland, crossing the Irish Sea, Ireland. And again, the train was stopping everywhere, and this time there were children getting on from London and being carried out of London as they were evacuating London. And the news came, Hitler did not agree to the terms. And on the 3rd of September, 1939, England and France were at war with Germany. He made it to England and across to Ireland. And then he took the train from the coast there to Dublin and on to Belfast. And when he got into Belfast and was met by one of the members of the church, they said, "Make sure this is a good sermon you preach, Dr. Barnhouse. It may be the last." And many people in the church will hear. And when he got into Belfast, he was then the pastor, or to his lodgings anyway, the pastor that he met, he said the same thing. There are some of these young men in the congregation who will never hear another sermon. So you better make it a good one. So this was about 3 o'clock in the morning, Sunday morning. And he had to plan his sermon. But he began to think what he was going to say. And the text that he arrived on was Matthew 24, verse 6. "And you will hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that you are not alarmed. For this must take place, but the end is not yet." And he expected there would be very few people in the congregation. When he got there that day, it was packed. And this was the sermon. Don't be alarmed. Father, we thank you for our study today. We thank you for your words of truth. We pray that you will grant us understanding, and we pray that as we leave this place, this gym where we study this word, and go into the auditorium, that we may worship in spirit and in truth. We ask in Christ's name. Amen.